It's timely, it's insightful, it's motivating, it's empowering. It's Time with Fred, your inspirational broadcast with host Fred Gaddy.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Time with Fred podcast. This is a podcast that challenges paradigms and mindsets that hold us back. This podcast can be heard on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and anywhere else you listen to your podcast. Today I have a very special guest and the person of James Belt, who joins us via Zoom from Maryland. He's a founder of Belt Enterprises. He's a missionary and he's an author as well. We're going to be talking about the work that he does, especially trying to eliminate that concept of poverty. I'm not going to steal the thunder away from him, but we'll dive right into it. James, welcome to the Time with Fred podcast today.
Thanks, Fred. I really appreciate you having me. It's
Pleasure
awesome.
is all mine. Yes, thank you for coming on. James, let's start by way of introduction. Just tell listeners and viewers a little bit about you, your work, and what launched you into this mission.
Sure, yeah. So just quick introduction to me. James, I have two kids, married with a wife, two dogs, two cats. And I like the joke is I have three hermit crabs. So we have a full house. But yeah, so how I got involved in Nicaragua was basically in 2006. The church I attend was relatively young, and they decided it was time to do something, missions related. We had grown a bit, and it kind of gotten to that point. And we connected with an organization called Orphan Network, and they started taking trips down. My family, my mom, my dad, and my sister actually traveled on that first trip to Nicaragua. I was in the midst of building a financial planning practice, very much on the front end of that. And I decided, well, this isn't really for me, at least not at this point in my life. I'll be the guy that sends the check. So they went down and they really enjoyed their time. And of course, they came back and they started coaxing me to go as well. So the next summer I started going as well. Kind of thought I was checking the box, more or less, going on a mission trip, and started to kind of fall in love with the country a little bit. And in 2009, my parents adopted a girl from Nicaragua, my sister Emmeline. She was 15 at the time. And during that time, I started to ask some questions about why the people I was meeting, the people that now I knew names and faces they weren't just the ideas, poverty, this community in particular, El Cañon, was very impoverished. And, we all see that on TV. Maybe you watch a Catholic Charities commercial or something, and you're like, oh, that's what poverty looks like. Well, now they had names. It was Maria Jose, Josue, various other people. And I started to ask, well, they seem just like me, as intelligent as me, as talented as me. Why are they in poverty and yet I am not? And that question and my background in finance, and I grew up in a family business, made me start to get more curious. And so I started to explore what I might be able to do there. And then in 2011, I was in this community called El Cañon. El Cañon means the canyon in Spanish. And it's just outside the capital city of Managua. And Nicaragua is known as the country of lakes and volcanoes. And so there's a lot of, mountainous areas. So you're headed up this hill just south of Managua. And on the right side, there's a concrete wall painted in white that you would just think is maybe like the entrance to somebody's driveway, but it's actually this, steep hill down into this community that no one would know about otherwise. And so I was on this hill kind of on the other side of that entrance into the canyon, overlooking it, with a bunch of kids that had gone hiking. And I felt this calling, not verbal, but as close to verbal as I've ever experienced, that said, "Where are you going?" And my first thought was, well, I'm going back to the United States on an airplane to my comfortable life in Maryland. And but I started to explore it, and I was the reluctant missionary who decided, okay, well, maybe this is my time, and ended up moving to Nicaragua to work with an organization called NicaWorks in community development and economic development. Lived there for 3 years and continue to work with them today. So
that's a very insightful background, James. I say insightful because not your purpose, I guess, was born out of this, you know, chance visit to Nicaragua, right? For a lot of people who do missions work or who decide to be missionaries, either, like you rightly said, it's, the checking the box, churches checking the box, or, doing it as part of their mission and, vision of the church. But in your case, it turns out to be like a life purpose, right? Leaving your financial investment business and then devoting your entire life. When you're growing up, did you know that this is what you wanted to do at all?
No, not at all. Honestly, it never was on my radar really at all. I imagined I'd be the business person. Grew up, like I said, in a family business. I went out and did financial planning for a while. But no, I never imagined it as a, I always liked serving people and helping people, but never saw it as a profession, so to speak.
What was it that made you believe that this trip to or the Nicaraguans, if that's what they call them, right, is where your purpose, right, was tied to? I asked this question because you mentioned when you were around there, you heard this inaudible voice asking where are you going, and that's a powerful question. One of three questions, personally, James, that I find to be the most important questions, right, that anyone can ask themselves. Number one, who are you? Number two, where are you? And then number three, where are you going? Who are you in terms of not just your name or what you do, but who are you in terms of your purpose and your calling in life, right? Where are you not in terms of your physical location presently, like you're sitting in your beautiful home in Maryland and me here and in Virginia, but where are you in terms of the proximity to that calling, right? To that place of destiny, if you will. And where are you going is really what's your mission and purpose in life. So when you say when you heard that voice, where are you going, it struck a chord within me. And James, I would dare say that a lot of us in life who couldn't answer, either one of those questions, really, the way it's intended to be, right? And so when someone poses that question, where are you going? I mean, let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, when you heard that, what resonated inside of you? What did that spark? What got you thinking in terms of your purpose and what you really want to do with your life?
That's a great question. So how I kind of came to the Nicaragua conclusion was really just I'd fallen in love, in a sense, with the country. I'd spent time there. Like I said, they had become almost family, not to the degree that they would eventually, but to that point, I really was invested in this sense. And when I heard the voice, not the voice, but the voice in my head, where are you going? That question that resonated, that went through my brain in that moment. What it really came down to was asking myself if I really believed what I had told other people. So interestingly enough, I'd been going through kind of what I would call a discipleship time in my life prior to this, and leading some other younger guys through a time of kind of saying, okay, well, what does it really look like to live the life that God has created for you? And so in that time, I had come to this conclusion of this idea. And it's this picture that's found in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament of the Bible, of these guys that are carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And before the river will stop, they actually have to take a step into the river. God says basically like, hey, you're going to cross the Jordan, but before it stops so you can cross it, you have to step into the rushing river. And I had kind of encouraged other people that, hey, real life is found in the river. It might look like a rushing river, but when God calls us to that moment, he, as challenging as it might be, and it was challenging in Nicaragua, there's real life found there. And so I had been going through and encouraging people in this way. And of course, it's in that same moment that I get this question, where are you going? And I was not married at the time, had no kids. I had the opportunity potentially, I thought maybe to not before I had that question, but as I started to unpack it, to move to Nicaragua and even work for my family business while I'm there to earn an income that way. And just kind of started to think, well, I am a person that might have that opportunity. I feel like God is calling to me this. Do I really believe that's true?
Mm.
And I've been equipped with these gifts through learning about finance, through growing up in a family business, through being invested in by others, leadership and things of that sort. That I felt like, well, I don't know what exactly the difference would be, but I think I can probably make a difference
Yeah.
if I put myself in the position for God to use me. And so that that's kind of how it went. It was, do I really believe it? Do I really believe that life is found in following that call, even if it seems like it's a rushing river?
Yeah. I love that. James, what does it take for one to realize where they're going in life, right? I liken this to be, that like all of us are on this journey, right? We're traveling. Where to, I'm not sure. We wake up in the morning, there's this rat race. There's, those of us who go to work and all that and businesses and all that. And there's this running on the treadmill, so to speak, right?
Mm,
But not going
yeah.
anywhere, right? And so we spend everything and trying to chase after something, right? But yet there's this void that really doesn't get filled,
Yeah.
right? And so it begs the question for us to kind of maybe look at this more closely, and each of us asking ourselves, where are you going? And it's not necessarily the comfort, right, or the luxury. In your case, you left the comfort of the United States and moved to a totally different place, right? I'm sure there were economic challenges, not like what you were used to growing up and all. And I think it takes a certain level of being in tune, right, with the spiritual, right, as I like to call it. I mean, we're all spiritual people here, but I think it takes more than that desire to just do it, right, and be it.
Hmm.
There's something beyond that normal. There's something beyond that mundane, because there's so many of us people who, make all that money, go through life, chase. Ecclesiastes said it rightly, it's all the chasing after the wind, right? But there's something that we kind of have to identify, right, in order to know, or to realize where it is we're going. And I wonder what it takes to realize that, what it takes to leave the familiar for the unfamiliar, what it takes to travel that road less traveled, what it takes to be able to see beyond, the facade of what seems the glitz and the glamour, right? To find exactly where, to pitch our tent, so to speak.
Mm,
What does it take for humanity, for us, for you and I, for other people to discover that place, right?
yeah.
That end quote, you
Yeah,
think?
that's a great question. The first thought that came to my mind was, I have two thoughts. Mother Teresa, somebody asked her, so how do you know what the next right thing to do is? And she says, well, I don't always. I just take the next step
Mm.
and I follow what I feel like God has called me to. But beyond that, I would say this, and I talk about this a lot in my book, Hope Realized, is this idea of spiritual hope.
Mm.
And so when I talk about spiritual hope, I'm talking about knowing that you're created by God for a purpose, on purpose. And I say by a God that loves you, and that you're not created for a life of less than, for a life of hopelessness, or you don't know kind of, okay, well, why am I really here? And we all go in those, we all have those moments, of course. But finding a spiritual hope that's foundational beyond that, and I talk about that in addressing poverty, but I think it applies oftentimes to us, whether we're in poverty or not, is having this foundational hope that says, you know, I believe I was created for something more. And when you ask me that question, why would you do that? Well, part of it is that belief. One, for myself. So I believe I was created for something more, that I can make a difference. Bring my part, bring my whatever I have to the table. But then two, that I believe there's something more for the people in Nicaragua, and that I believe there is hope for them, that they're not hopeless, and that God created them on purpose and for a purpose, and that they might need resources, or they might need a reminder, that of that reality. But that is part of what drove me, is it's just this belief that there's more for them and more for me. And I think in helping them see that there's hope for them, I find hope for myself.
Yeah, I love that. You make the argument that poverty isn't just a lack of resources. Often, even after resources are available, poverty lingers. Um, why is that?
Yeah, yeah. I talk about just the idea that oftentimes there was a study I think in 2017, um, somewhere around, I'm going to get the number wrong now, but $100 million was invested in a certain country, and yet poverty persisted. And I think that what you find is we'll bring the practical resources, the money or whatever that might look like, and sometimes not even in the right way. That can also be a problem, where we're fixing a problem that isn't really there. Maybe we're giving a handout when really an investment is needed. And sometimes people do need to be addressing the immediate needs, but not always. But I think what happens is we invest these practical resources without addressing that spiritual hope element. And I talk about how there's this, as I lived in Nicaragua, as I moved there, I found that the byproducts of poverty, so the hunger, the education problems, the unemployment issues, it's much like an iceberg. Those byproducts that we see are just the 10%. The 90% that's below the surface is what really feeds them, and that is hopelessness. And what I call the lie of hopelessness, because I don't think anybody is truly hopeless, at least created for that. And so it's that hopelessness, both practically, so the lack of a real opportunity, and spiritually, the lack of a reframed identity or a clear picture on who you were created to be, that really feeds that. And oftentimes, they kind of feed each other. They're cyclical in a sense. And so that's why I would say, even when we bring the resources, sometimes we don't see the change because people are still seeing themselves as created for less than, and we haven't addressed that issue. So yeah, maybe we see, 10% change where we could maybe see, 70 or 80% change if we actually address the identity issue, and, address the need for a reframed identity.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of this parable or story. You may have heard this about this rich man who had everything, all the things you can think for in a son. And I think it took his son somewhere to this village, and his son came back and talked about how rich these folks were, even though they didn't have nearly as much possessions as this kid had. And I think he was telling his dad about how they had the open skies, they could see the stars, and they didn't have a roof overhead or something like that. And I think it makes the argument um, about how powerful perspective is, right? In terms
Mm.
of, you know, feeling rich or being poor. I think it's really all about perspective. Can have someone who was, born in some really what we deem to be poverty-stricken environment, but yet they may be happier than someone who was raised in a mansion. So I think there's that element of perspective, right? That
Sure.
yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I do agree with that. I think there are, varying levels. So I talk about, when I say, okay, well, let's um, moving people from extreme poverty to, uh, you know, a life of thriving. It doesn't always mean that they're becoming wealthy or rich. It's reaching their God-given potential. And so, what I like to think about when I talk about that kind of a thing is, I do think people can have the perspective. I think the challenge sometimes is that people in poverty can live on this razor thin edge, where when something goes wrong, it completely destroys everything. And so, somebody gets sick and it throws them into the need to go to a loan shark to borrow money at 100% interest. And so it's moving people at least beyond that point. But I do think perspective plays a ton in it. And that's why I think sometimes you'll see when the right resources become available, that person that has the right perspective is able to use them in a way that actually makes a difference. And so I agree with what you're saying with
Yeah,
that caveat.
yeah. Let's talk about your book, Hope Realized. I mean, you write about some actionable steps in here. Can you maybe give us a few of some of the pointers in your book and the message there? Just
Sure.
analysis of yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, first thing, and this is kind of coming from my experience. So, When I tell people, okay, so maybe you're saying, okay, now I do believe that we can address poverty through practical and spiritual hope, through all in hope. What can I do? First great step is to be curious. So what does that look like? It might look like examining your own story to see where hope, both practical and spiritual, has played a role in your life, or even the lack thereof in certain cases has played a role in your life. And then being curious about poverty itself. So why does poverty exist? Examining that a little bit more, and what preconceived ideas or what perceptions do I have about people in poverty? One thing I often say is we will treat people the way we perceive them. So if we perceive someone as hopeless, we're going to treat them accordingly, even if it's subconsciously. And so it's kind of breaking down and saying, okay, well, maybe I need to change the way I think about people, and looking at that. And then another great step is to examine what you bring to the table. So when I went to Nicaragua, we first, started going to an orphanage, and I said, well, it's great hanging out with kids, but I don't really know what I have to offer in this situation. And what I learned was I actually had a lot to offer in Nicaragua in the way that I was wired and the gifts that I was given. In my case, it was, business development and vocational training and leadership and things of that sort. But everyone brings their own gifts. I know someone that brought their skills in carpentry, or teachers that can teach. So what do you actually bring to the table, and how can you maybe make a difference with what gifts and resources, there's financial resources as well that are needed, obviously, in addressing these kind of problems. What can you bring to the table? And then look for someone that is potentially already doing that, that could use your gifts. So get connected to another organization, to a person that maybe is already engaged in working in poverty. I work with NicoWorks, so find someone like NicoWorks, maybe that is engaged in an area that you find interesting or have a heart for, or that matches your gift set, and get connected so that you can get a feel for how you can make a difference. And then the last one I say is just take a step. So, for me, taking a step, I didn't know where it was headed, was going on this mission trip. If I wouldn't have ever done that, who knows if I ever would have lived in Nicaragua, and if I'd be talking to you now about the book I wrote. But that wasn't, my first step wasn't live in Nicaragua, write a book. It was go on a mission trip. And often that's how it starts. Just take a step, use your gifts, get connected to somebody, maybe just make a donation to somebody. If that's an organization that you're like, wow, they're doing something, in an area that I find interesting, or using gifts that I find interesting, that could be a great first step. But take some step, and that'll get you started. And I found as we start to bring hope to others, we find more hope for ourselves. I think we're probably wired. It's probably wired, and we're made to work that way. But by taking that step, I think it'll empower you to continue to follow that road.
I love that last statement that you made there, and I think that was going to prompt my next question here about you sow that seed. It's a law of reciprocity, right? You get it back, and in this very individualistic society that we live in, where everything is focused on me, there's this greed, and thus all that desire to amass. And there's nothing wrong with working hard and getting whatever you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that it's sort of skewed a little bit, right? Where there's more focus on the self and me and what I can get out of it versus, and then if there's anything left, maybe we might drop a few crumbs for the other person itself. But you make that point here that you sow hope, you get hope, and let's talk about that seed there and why it's important sometimes for us to not overlook necessarily or forgo our own needs, but prioritize the needs of others, right? And be more of a giver, right? And in turn, and someone may be listening and hearing, well, I have my own problems, right? I have my own needs. Why do I even bother, sowing into or even thinking about someone else? But the opposite is true. I mean, I've experienced that. I mean, you understand that law, and there is something about sowing and reaping, right? It's not only a spiritual law; it's a fundamental law. I mean, given atheists believe in that. I mean, they
Yeah.
don't call it, but they give. I mean, you think about some of the world's richest people.
Mhm.
They give millions, right, of their money away to other charities, and that's, and no wonder, right? It keeps coming back.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit and how that's so contrary to, society's view of, it's just me. Let me just focus on me. It's me, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thought I have is that, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is that oftentimes we do think, well, the problem of poverty is someone else's problem. It's not, I'm not connected to it at all. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. There's a lot of evidence, statistical evidence. But, what I would say is that when we see hopelessness and we feel like we can't make a difference, or even when we just focus on our own problems, it feeds our own hopelessness because we feel like, well, gosh, I can't make a difference there. I don't have anything to offer. Or we think, we get so myopic and focused on our own issues, that we don't have perspective. And so, first off, I would say, we have to realize we all are connected, whether we want to be or not. There's, by not addressing the issue of hopelessness, we're feeding our own hopelessness in a sense. And then beyond that, kind of exactly as you're saying, when we decide, okay, I'm going to invest my life in someone else, we there's like this relationship that happens where we start to see change in them, we start to see hope in them, and then that in turn provides us hope and provides us perspective and allows us to move beyond maybe the blinders that we have on to the problems that we have. It doesn't make those problems go away. I have problems as well. I have a struggle with anxiety, I talk about a little bit in the book at times, and so I have my own problems as well. But when I move beyond just focusing on them to bringing hope to others, there is something, I would say, I would argue, we're created for, to that gives us more hope for ourselves and for the world. And so I would just encourage you, if you are saying, I have my own problems and I don't want to worry about somebody else, well, the best way to maybe be able to get a different perspective on your own problems is by helping someone else.
Yeah.
And bringing hope to others. You might find that is exactly what you need to help you bring hope to yourself. Certainly address your own issues as well, but don't stop there.
Yeah, I love that. One of the questions, James, that I like to ask my guests on this podcast is what defines them. And, having, talked about your life, your purpose, and hearing that call and figuring out where you're going, and looking back on your own life and where that journey started, financial planning, business, and now taking an entirely different turn to where you are now, what would you say defines you, or there's maybe one defining moment in your life's journey? What would that be? To say?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question because I could probably think of a few, but um, I would say just this realization that uh, that no one is really truly hopeless. That and that I can play a role in making a difference in this world. I grew up and I had people invest in me. I had a grandfather who was a Methodist pastor. He wrote me letters, which was really neat. That's part of my story about my spiritual hope story. But I still struggled a lot with self-worth and things of that sort. When I realized though that I could make a difference beyond my own life, that I had something to offer, it really changed things for me. And I can think of I I can think of this one moment. Actually, I was running on a treadmill in a cardio cinema, which is basically like a screen with treadmills. And I was running along, and for some reason, as I was thinking, and this movie was playing, that had nothing to do with what I was thinking about, I had this realization that there is hope for people that we often perceive as hopeless, and that I have this ability to make a difference. And I think in some ways, as weird as that is, that was kind of one of my defining moments, was saying, I think that might be what started me down that journey of saying, I can bring hope to others and, discover more hope for myself. And so it's now part of my journey is reminding people that there is hope for them. There's failure in the journey, but that's not the end of the story. And that they can find hope for themselves, and they can reach their God-given potential. And so that was a real perspective change for me, and has been a big defining moment, and really defines, I think, how I live. I try to live, not always perfectly, but try to live today.
What do you say to that person, James, who is just listening or watching and saying, look, I don't have anything to offer. My life's a mess. Growing up, I didn't have anything. I'm in poverty myself. There's really no bright side to anything. I don't have the resources. I don't have anything. It's been all such a mess. I mean, what do I have to give to someone if I can't figure it out? What do you say to that person right now?
Yeah, so I think we all have different things to give, and we all at different moments in our lives have different levels of resources and things of that sort, but we all have something to offer. So I would imagine, if you I like to call mine your story. So you dig down in your story and you say, well, what did I learn from this particular situation? Maybe you dealt with something really challenging. I have a good friend that's dealing with pretty serious, almost post-traumatic stress disorder right now, and he kind of feels that way a little bit. Like, gosh, I don't. My life's not together. What do I have to give? Well, you've learned things even through this journey that you could offer someone, and it may not feel like a lot in that moment, but it might be exactly what someone needs. So I would just say, don't give up on yourself. You have something to offer, and that might change over time, but you have something to offer. I truly believe that.
Yeah. And as we kind of wrap up here, let's talk a little bit, James, about your book, Hope Realized, and where listeners and viewers can find that, and perhaps the work that you do. Someone may not have the resources to fly to Nicaragua or anywhere else, but they may want to be able to, they may desire to kind of help, support somehow. You talk a little bit about that, and in the last few minutes as we kind of wrap up, where they can learn a little bit about your work and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So my book is Hope Realized, and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, really anywhere you buy books online. And it really follows my journey and talks a lot about my story and how you can learn from that to bring hope to other people. Gives you a new definition or a new perspective on poverty, hope, and what you can do to bring it. And actually, I'll just say this real quick. When you buy Hope Realized, 50% of the royalties from that book are going back to NicaWorks. So just by purchasing the book, you're actually bringing hope. It's one step you can take. And NicaWorks, the organization I work with, just a little bit about them. We continue to do work in Nicaragua in community and economic development. We have a number of vocational training and business development programs going on. We have a used pre-owned bike shop that we've developed, that we send bikes down. People donate bikes, and then the bike shop buys them, and then we use some of that money to pour back in the community. We have some agriculture vocational training going on, sewing, and then we partner with a number of churches, in the spiritual hope side of things as well, as well as a couple other projects. But we keep working in Nicaragua. We have a staff team down there now. So when I moved down, I was the only one on staff. Now we have a group of Nicaraguans that are working and doing a great job, and I'm super thankful for them. So,
James, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing a little bit of hope with myself, with my audience, and with whoever is listening or watching. And hopefully this has left you with a little bit of hope. This is really all about. Check out James's book, Hope Realized. Check out the work that he does. His website and information will be in that show notes as well. And this is really what this podcast is all about, right? It's bringing hope. And I do hope that, no pun intended, that we've left you with a little bit of hope, regardless of what you may be going through. Thank you for spending your time with us, and to you, James, as well, for coming on and inspiring our audience. And until next time, stay well.
Thank you.